from Israel. As far as we can tell at this point, obviously this is still very early, just minutes now that we've known that this deal is apparently going to go through. Do we have a sense what the agreement is? We know that it was really a red line for Hamas, that they wanted to make sure that the military would move out of the West Bank, would not be in Gaza. What does each side get in return here, at least in this first phase, Ian?
Yeah, Lindsay, I think that is the critical question. What did Hamas, what did the Arab and Muslim negotiators get in return? At the moment, the answer is it's not very clear. Now, the Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesman posted on social media talking about the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire agreement, which would lead to stopping the war. So releasing of the Israeli hostages and some Palestinian prisoners, around 250 convicted Palestinian prisoners, as well as, we think, hundreds more, including women and children who were detained inside Gaza, and allowing aid to enter. There's also going to be a partial withdrawal of Israeli forces. And I think we have to wait and see to what point do Israeli forces withdraw, what kind of buffer zone do they maintain, and what happens crucially with phase two that's supposed to lead to a lasting ceasefire. A temporary ceasefire we've already seen before. The release of hostages we've already seen before. And then eventually that agreement was broken by Israel and they resumed the bombing. So what guarantees do the people of Gaza have that that won't happen? And until that deal is signed and we see the large print and the small print, we just don't know the answer. But we should be asking those questions right now.
Of course, Donald Trump, then candidate, pledged while he was running for president that he would end this war in Gaza. He wrote just at the end of his Truth Social post, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Of course, a line from Scripture. Do we get a sense of who the peacemakers were? We know that in September, when the UN General Assembly met here in New York, that this was forefront of several nations. Many of the leaders from, and particularly in the Middle East, were saying that they were having these side meetings with President Trump. We understand that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, of course, his son-in-law, were involved. Do we have a sense of what really finally seemed to get us across this line?
Yeah, I think the substantial difference here is the coalition that President Trump managed to put together. His exceedingly warm relations with Qatar, I think, have been central to that, but also with President Erdogan of Turkey, as well as Saudi Arabia, as well as the Emirates. All those countries' leaders, and Egypt, of course, have been absolutely instrumental. And when we knew that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were flying into Egypt, to Sharm el-Sheikh, to take part in this agreement, what I think few people focused on was who the other people were that were going. So it's the head of Turkish intelligence, the head of Egyptian intelligence, the Qatari Prime Minister and the Qatari Foreign Minister. Well, frankly, you don't put those high-level people in the room unless you're fairly confident that you will get a decision. But what you're also seeing that we haven't seen before is pressure on Hamas from the countries with which it had cordial relations at the very least, in particular Turkey and Qatar, both of whom are seen as sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is an offshoot. And that seems to have been absolutely critical. So for the first time, and we're used to President Trump claiming credit for many, many things, and sometimes that's valuable and sometimes it's not entirely accurate. But on this occasion, he absolutely did put together this enormous coalition of people that rarely agree. And if this comes off, this will be one of the most landmark agreements in this region for decades. If it actually leads to a lasting ceasefire, to peace in Gaza, to peace potentially between Palestinians and Israelis, we're still a very long way away from that. Netanyahu also has to try and sell this to his own government. There are right-wing members of his coalition, in the cabinet in particular, who will not be happy about any idea that potentially Hamas would remain in power, or that Hamas would retain any weapons, or that Israeli forces would totally withdraw from Gaza. So there is a lot of devil in a lot of detail. So we have to wait and see. But this in and of itself, of course, is going to be huge for Israelis. The Hostage and Families Forum have already put out a message. Again, slightly cautious. They're thanking President Trump, but they're also saying they want to wait and see for this to happen. There have been a lot of false dawns for a lot of people. And for Gazans, I think they'll be just left asking the question, what does this mean for them? Does this mean that the bombing will truly end, that there will be development, that they'll be allowed to go back to their homes? And crucially, will there be enough food to eat? Will this aid start to flow again? So many, many unanswered questions. But nevertheless, President Trump, through sheer force of will, seems to have made this happen. Again, if you look at the Hamas statement that we got, that then triggered this series of events. This was the Hamas response to President Trump's 20-point peace proposal. Well, at first blush, there were no surprises there. It was, yes, we agree to release the hostages, but there were a whole list of yes, but, which is what we expected. But it's almost like President Trump had his own sense of reality, saying, well, they just agreed to release all the hostages. And such is the strength of his character and his ability to influence allies in the Middle East and elsewhere, that he has got this coalition together to get to this point where they're going to agree on phase one, something that President Trump absolutely said. But just one final point on this question of, is this it or is there something more? Again, Donald Trump has said repeatedly that this isn't an isolated deal. This is one part of a wider process of Middle East peace, expanding the Abraham Accords. And if that's his aim, then there has to be more than just hostage release inside Gaza.
You can certainly assume that the Trump administration will count this among the promises made, promises kept category. And as you say, Ian, still a lot of devil in the details. Thank you so much, Ian Pannell.